Tribute Pod production.
Feeling good? Here we go.
Open secret.
Hello and welcome to Open Secret, the power of open source intelligence. I'm Jane Van Tienen.
And I'm Kylie Pert. Thanks for joining us.
Today on Open Secret, Kylie and I are joined by someone who has spent 3 decades leading at the sharpest edges of intelligence, investigation and transformation. Brigadier General retired Terry Bullard is the former commander of the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or OSI for short. Perhaps you've seen the TV show. But for those who haven't, OSI is a part of the United States intelligence community, and it serves as a federal law enforcement agency responsible for criminal, fraud, and counterintelligence investigations, as well as executive protection, specialised operations, and integrated force protection for the US Air Force and Space Force worldwide. It's also a combat-ready military organisation. During his time in command, Terry led more than 3,900 airmen conducting global intelligence and security operations across 6 continents. But perhaps what's most compelling to us is where he's leading now, and that is in the open source domain. Since retiring, Terry has joined a company called 3 Gimbals, a US national security OSINT provider. There, he draws on his deep leadership experience and his gift for clear, principled communications to help national security leaders harness the value of open source intelligence. In this episode, we talk about OSINT as both a capability and as a cultural shift, what it means for traditional intelligence communities, and what leaders must do to unlock its full potential. We also explore some big questions. What does leadership look like when the stakes aren't just about security, but about the values that we choose to protect? And how is open source intelligence, everything from satellite imagery to social sentiment, changing not only how decisions are made, but how leaders are showing up in a changing world? Brigadier General Terry Bullard, welcome to Open Secret. You are our first Brigadier General who has ever appeared on our podcast, so this is a greenfields opportunity for you. And Terry, we're excited to have you.
Now you've really put the pressure on, Jane. I tell you what, I was already worried about performing up to expectations, and now I've got to carry that weight. But I am so glad to be here, so glad to be able to take time with you and Kylie and just talk about something I think we're all passionate about, several things actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. The pleasure is ours. Some of the highlights from my time serving as a diplomat for the Australian government in the US were actually enjoyed in your company and the company of your team at Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And so I was there to celebrate you on your promotion to Brigadier General and your promotion to become the 19th Commander of Air Force OSI, right through to your retirement ceremony in May of 2023 after 30 years of dedicated service. You walked me from beginning to end.
And Jane,
right.
Any success I had in between, I'm going to have to attribute to you.
Awesome.
That's very kind of you, but an exaggeration.
In all sincerity, I will tell you absolutely the same thing. It was such a pleasure to have you and your colleagues there and to be able to do the things between 2 nations who have such a great history. And it's such an interesting time to be in service as well.
I've had the privilege of a really small insight into what has been a remarkable career. And it's a career that has spanned leading investigations and intelligence operations at the highest levels. And so my question to you then is, if you had the opportunity to sum up your entire journey in one sentence, what would that sentence be? And what's the story behind that sentence?
Well, I thought we were going to go easy on me. No, actually, it's pretty simple. An incredible ride surrounded by tremendous people. I had the pleasure of being an initial accession of coming directly into OSI as a second lieutenant. And other than my career broadening time outside, whether that was teaching at the War College or doing the joint assignments that officers have to do, I had the pleasure of spending an entire career around a group of people who always were there for you and pushed you to be the best version of yourself. if you will. And then the mission, truly feeling like you were making a difference every day.
Yeah, I think what it does is really highlights your passion for leadership and teams that we're going to get into a lot today.
Absolutely. And making it so easy when you're around people like that to be a part and know that they've got your back as you're doing the same for them.
Terry, your career has spanned a wide range of disciplines. Reflecting on that journey, what would you say has been the most significant shift in your thinking about intelligence from when you first started to where you are now?
Really seeing the difference in how we approach intelligence and information. And by that, I mean, you really grow up and very early, I think in what would have been both of our careers, that the classified information, the high-end information is really what drove your day to day. And open source intelligence was more of a complementary feature. But I think so many people in the intelligence community are talking today about how that paradigm is really shifting. And it is the ability now to get through this massive amount of information on the open source side of things, allowing you to find more things to then develop that more sensitive information and techniques in working. So to me, watching that change, when it's not only a technical change, but it's a cultural change.
Yeah.
When I started my career, we looked at the Cold War and that Cold War mentality. I looked at that very differently and looked at open source intelligence very differently than I do now with the incredible people and incredible tools and technology we have to work with. So getting to see that has been a lot of fun.
Really, OSINT is the most accessible of all of the other ints when you consider sharing and collaboration and what have you.
You're absolutely right, Jane. Even when you and I wanted to talk with each other and wanted to share information, there was a process, and that process sometimes was very rigid, very slow to move, not nearly as quickly as we would like it to be. Then I transition it to the criminal side. And that can be criminal in the form of a counterintelligence investigation, or it can be in the form of a crimes against persons fraud case, where that classified information actually complicates that investigation because the government has to decide whether we're going to declassify that information, or whether we're going to allow it to go through, which, of course, with OSINT, there's none of that complications. As long as you have obtained it lawfully and legally and ethically and in an admissible standard, those are the only minimum bars you have to get past.
It sort of strikes me as I'm listening to you, there is quite clearly a lot of new technology, new tradecraft to go along with that technology that the intelligence community and the public writ large are kind of engaging with at the moment. But of course, there's things that we know about our past that should always inform what we do today and how we engage in intelligence collaboration. I came across a keynote address that you provided to the Citadel, so newly minted officers who in their graduating class of 2023. And you recounted the first attack on the World Trade Center to them back in 1993, the bombings in the US embassies in Africa, the tragic and game-changing event of 9/11, of course, and then everything, all of the wars, the conflicts that have subsequently followed. These issues continue to vex the US, but also the globe. And you gave the graduating class the following piece of advice, and I'm going to quote you back to you.
Oh, no.
So you said, "Future leaders, I give you this piece of history not to pull you back, but to help you set a frame of reference to keep your gaze wide for the future you now own." And so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the power of that statement when you think about intelligence leadership in today's context.
You have these huge moments in history that happen that absolutely change life for all of us. But then you have the accompanying ability of, Jane, as you say, the technology that is moving so fast that often it outpaces policy, it outpaces the law. We're constantly sprinting, and that sprint seems to get faster. It seems to become more dynamic. And so what I really wanted to impart to the team is to certainly read your guidance, certainly understand the lay of the land today, but know that we are only one big event from changing and from having to turn on a dime and move in another direction. And it's that flexibility. And I think that goes for the intelligence community as well. It's our ability to move with that and not be stuck or not fight that change, but understand it, accept it, and be as dynamic and lead through that change. Lead through that pivot that you have to make as best you can.
Terry, that makes me think about a couple of things. I always think that as intelligence professionals that we're always adding to our toolkits, but we never seem to take anything out. So it gets very heavy
Yes.
You don't want to throw it out in case you need it for the upcoming problem, but you can't see necessarily what the new problem is. When you say being adaptable and leading through change is more about qualities in individuals than it is about any particular skill that could potentially be learnt. But if you were giving advice to any young folks today about prioritising their training and prioritising a skill set or something that you think will get them through, what would it be in order for them to be able to make sure that they can manage the vast volume and complexity of available data? Because let's face it, they are getting way more than we ever did when we first started. It's a bit different now.
Right.
So do you have something in particular that you think people could prioritise for themselves if you were giving them advice?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. The really old person is going to come out in me, Kylie, when I say this, but read.
Man after my own heart. Love it.
Training it's not just courses. It absolutely is having those opportunities to take those formal in-service trainings and to be able to go do those things and to constantly be looking to advance. But it is the fact that we are responsible for our own development as well. And part of that, I am convinced, is history. You really can't chart where you're going to go
if you don't know where you've been.
Exactly. Where the foundation is, what's going on. I'm following several great writers and thinkers on the Pacific region right now. And I absolutely love the fact that there are several of those, one in particular, who she does a fantastic job of constantly bringing back the historic significance of, let's just say, the first and second island chains in the Pacific, and not just having us think about it in today's context, but thinking about it in World War I, in World War II, prior to that, and its relevance to our countries, Australia, the United States, other great powers at the time. But really, if you don't understand that and you don't understand that acquired knowledge, I think, of the cultures in the region and what they are coming with, it really skews your assessment.
Indeed.
As an intelligence professional.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand that, you can't be as effective as quickly and as consistently as you need to be. But I think I would tell them, take advantage of every opportunity formally that is put in front of you, but take every opportunity to read and follow those folks that you find to be really good in the blogosphere, that you find to be really good online sources of information. But every once in a while, just grab a book. It doesn't all have to be online. It doesn't have to all be there. And really take the time to find those quiet moments to learn your craft, the history of your craft, and to understand where your craft is going. And I would say, kind of picking that up and moving it over, the same goes for leadership. I am of the camp that leaders are made as much or more than they are born. It's just like being a great athlete. It's just like being a tremendous mind. If it's not developed, you're going to peak. You're going to plateau at a point where you probably could have done so much more with the discipline and follow through of learning your craft.
So what about when really strong leaders, lots of executive leadership experience, when they step into new frontiers of technology, and perhaps they're from, if they've got a lot of experience, a different generation to a large portion of their workforce, how is it that they can build credibility while driving the change that they need to in that context?
Oh, my goodness. What a great question. Because it's one that we debated, because, I think you're right. As you become more senior, it is so easy to go, I just don't understand this younger generation. And it's very easy to be dismissive. It's very easy to lose credibility and lose the ability to make your way through change. And so I would tell other leaders, we may notice all of these changes, but what's important is they don't. Their context is their context.
So true.
It's very easy, I think, for us as seniors to sit back and try to find fault with younger generation. But I would tell folks, you know what? Why don't you look for the positives? Why don't you look for the benefits? Why don't you look at the fact that we're dealing with an entire young workforce who are digital natives, not digital immigrants like us?
True.
Jane, I would say it's that willingness to listen and understand, but not totally abdicating our responsibility to also teach and help put what they are thinking in a historic context as you're also thinking about what this is going to look like in the future. And I think by just being willing to have that dialogue, I will tell you, one of the things that frustrated me the most is, so many in my generation were like, I don't like the fact that we give an order and people ask why. We would just take that hill,
Yes.
right? We would just go.
Yeah. How high? Jump how high? Yeah.
Exactly. But I said, okay, it doesn't mean that they're not going to do it. It means they want to be included in the why. They want to understand why that we're moving forward. Quite frankly, as someone who likes to sit and talk, with people, that was fine with me. I was happy. And in fact, I showed that and really took it as a way for people to get more committed, more involved, because you were making them part of the why, not just to go do it because I said so.
It's such an interesting thing, I think, particularly even in a training context. I've often heard people talk about you don't understand intelligence tradecraft until you train it, because you're needing to explain the why, you're needing to break it down into basic principles and be challenged on those principles by the pupils. And it's sort of a similar concept, isn't it? This concept of consultation and active listening and leadership.
Absolutely. And I tell you, I'm a firm believer that if you really want to know your craft, if you really want to understand how to do it, teach it, because you can't hide as one in a class of 10 or 20 or 30 and you can't wait for your turn, but you have to constantly be on all the time. But you're right. I think great leaders are educators, whether they know it or not, and whether that's by the word or by the deed, how they treat others, how they identify that different people learn in different ways. And so therefore I have to take this different approach with this individual to be able to communicate what I need out of this mission aspect. And what I miss is being in a small unit where you knew that about all the people sitting around the conference room table and your kind of broken chairs, at the most tactical level and enjoying that. Where it got harder was when you were trying to do that through 3 or 4 layers of leadership and how you got that down.
Terry, this point you're making that great leaders are educators really speaks to me. And what you said about leaders being made, not born. So why is it then that we don't always treat leadership like something people need to learn? Something we should actively invest in and grow in others? Is this something that you've seen shift over the course of your career?
100%. And I will tell you, watching the evolution of this within OSI. So like many other organizations, you got called and told you were going to be a detachment commander or a squadron commander or even a region commander. So at the Air Force's wing level. And you kind of left on a Friday and showed up on a Monday, and something was supposed to magically happen over the weekend that just transitioned you into this next level of leader. And of course, what we found is that was not a great recipe for success, right? But no. And I think our command very quickly reckoning with, we needed to set leaders up for success. We needed to identify them early, get them transitioning. But you're right, take them out of the workspace, put them in an environment around other learning leaders with experienced leaders who had been there, done that, who at least could provide some examples and some context of what you're about to set into. And those couple of weeks of investment just paid huge dividends on the other side, for the success rate went up in people being successful in leadership at that next level. Hey, computer-based training has its place. Things that you just need to remind yourself every year. But if you're investing in a person to take care of 6 other people, 20 other people, 400 people, 4,000 people, well, then you had better set aside some time for them to step out of that role and purely invest in themselves, take the benefit of others, take the benefit of that experience, and have those conversations. So some of these things are not necessarily teaching the skill as it is, teaching decision making, teaching critical thinking, and honestly telling people there is no way I can train you for every hypothetical, every situation that's going to happen on a surveillance, right? That's going to happen in an investigation or operation. It's just going to happen. And you deal with it as best you can based on your experience. But I think also that sense that I am in an organization where my decision may be critiqued, but it's going to be supported, because something had to happen. Something had to get there.
I mean, the question that springs to mind then, and I'm sure, Kylie, your mind's going here as well, is that with all of that said, how should we at the moment be getting our leaders ready in the age of AI?
Oh boy, talk about a great question. Another pivotal point we find ourselves in history. Thank goodness it's not or hasn't become yet, towers collapsing, bombing. It's not a strategic pivot, but it is the emergence of this incredible technology and recognizing it already has and already is, but is just going to revolutionize in an evolutionary way everything that we do as human beings. I think, Jane, I tell leaders, don't try to, be so broad that you hit paralysis, meaning how is AI going to decide this policy or what type of aircraft that we are going to move toward or how those other aspects, but start with your discipline. Start with the positives. How can this move us forward? How can I employ this in a smart, ethical, moral way to use this technology to move ourselves forward, while also red teaming yourself a little bit and thinking, how are my adversaries going to do this and use this technology as well? And how does that change how I am going to approach things? Try to extrapolate where you will be 20 years, 30 years from now. I mean, truly think about this as a partner.
Something that you mentioned to me in an earlier conversation that we had, and that is that we don't need people to enable the tech. We need the tech to enable the people.
Yes.
And so that really speaks to this issue of partnership that you're talking about there.
And it does, Jane. And I've seen in your writings, you make this exact point. The human still sits at the apex of all of this, still has the creativity, the discerning approach. We bring that to it. But imagine the 90% of the routine work, the historical data that can be pulled forward that allows the human to just focus on that 10 critical percent. And how much more effective we are, and then how we can bound that forward into re-challenging the AI to say, well, this is great, fantastic. Now tell me about it in this way. Now use this lens to bring me this forward. And I find myself having this conversation with AI systems now. You do your interrogation, you get your answer. And then I love the fact of saying, okay, now give it to me from this perspective. Mm-hmm. And just how enriching that is to truly understanding a problem. And I think back to your core question, I think leading through this for leaders to, as best they can, keep up with and understand the technology, understand the limits and potential problems with that technology, but constantly be looking to say, how can I use this to make my agents, my analysts, my support personnel more productive? And how can I ultimately use this to bring justice or to bring better intelligence insights to the challenges that I'm working with?
I agree with what you're saying there. Terry, back in 2007, when I deployed on Allied operations in Iraq, it was considered a major innovation to have an open source specialist embedded within an all source analytical team. At the time, their role was primarily to provide quicker access to publicly available information to support us analysts working with classified material. Fast forward to today, and the landscape has evolved dramatically given the growing use of AI in analysis. Is it time to embed AI specialists within analytical teams, individuals who can act as a bridge between the technology and the strategic analysts? Could such a role help ensure the quality and veracity of machine-generated insight and potentially streamline workflows rather than slow them down due to later verification steps?
Kali, you're spot on. And I would say that time is here now. Being fairly new to the open source side of the house and the leadership side of the house, I can tell you our data scientists, our modelers are so critical in helping us understand, because a lot of my analysts come in and absolutely they've got great backgrounds in GON or all source or, you name it.
They've read all the books you said they should read. They get the cultural nuances. Yeah.
And AI has made them kind of sort of, code writers. But I think what is missing is, you're absolutely right, those data scientists, those statistical modelers, those people who bring a different discipline to data, who look at data in a different way and are quick to challenge, I think, the pure analyst sitting on the staff to say, how did you find this? How did you structure it? How did you interrogate the system to bring you this conclusion? And so I've been fascinated watching these conversations play out.
Yeah.
And you're right, the front end, or perhaps we're into it even further than I can understand. There is so much information, being careful not to put all of that information on the same level. Which is not revolutionary to an analyst, right? In the bad old days, I had to, assign a number to the veracity of, what I was reporting and who I was talking to, right?
That's right.
It's just on a far larger scale, far faster. And so I think we need those people to complement our analysts who understand data discipline, who understand when that lake is not a lake anymore, it's a swamp. And it's a problem and it's an issue. And here's why it's a problem. We're not saying don't pull information there, but don't treat that the same as this other pure source that I'm far more confident in. That data has been curated in a smart way with us in mind. In this other area, you need to question that more. You need to find other complementing ways to do that, or that is probably not what you want your product or your assessment to stand on.
In your experience, Terry, have you observed situations where OSINT has outpaced classified intelligence in real-world decision-making?
100%. Yes, ma'am. Without a doubt. Let me go back to my personal experience. When I was engaging with the company that I have become a part of, I asked to see some of their products. And I will tell you, I got to the end of looking at some of these products and I turned to the individual and said, how in the world is this not classified? How did you find this? How did you do this without using exquisite techniques, capabilities to be able to get after that? And I loved it because they were like, let us show you. And opened the hood on the car, as we say, and showed us how we did that. But now, Jane, I would say I watch my team produce things on a weekly basis that still makes my jaw drop.
Well, it's certainly encouraging to hear that the good guys are making real strides in AI and emerging technologies, especially in such a complex global environment. But could that technological edge actually become a double-edged sword? I mean, if we're ahead, doesn't that just make us a bigger target for adversaries who are trying to figure out what we're capable of and what our limits are? And when those adversaries aren't bound by the same ethical or legal constraints as democratic nations, doesn't that put us at a disadvantage? As you see it, what are some of the most pressing challenges democracies face when it comes to the development and use of AI?
You hit on exactly the challenge. And in democracies now, I have no doubt we're all struggling with this balance of, civil liberties and respecting the rights of others and respecting privacy and having that and trying to navigate this historic governance of intelligence and get our way through that. As we talked about before, the technology usually far outpaces the policy and the law behind it. We find ourselves, in the field having to have these discussions of, do I tap into this or do I not? Do I report this way? Do I not? Can I do that? And often struggling without any mooring at all.
Which is a whole overhead that our adversaries don't have often.
Exactly. And we get frustrated when counsel comes into the room and says, guys, we can't do this way. I think other people are quick to jump up and challenge and say, well, the adversary, certainly isn't having this discussion and they're not doing it this way. And I tend to kind of ride the middle. I find myself in this negotiation space of we absolutely understand that, but we can't lose who we are in this journey of blending the intelligence with our principles. And I am convinced we would have failed a long time ago if it was impossible to do so. And the conversations are hard, they're heated, they are often frustrating. I find myself banging my head against the desk, right? Going, how can you see it this way? But then when you've got a little bit of time to reflect and say, thank goodness we do have these conversations.
Terry, this actually gets me thinking about some of the challenges we see in personnel security vetting. How do you see open source intelligence fitting into that process?
If I can go all the way back, for 20 years, personnel vetting, quite frankly, wasn't highly technical work. You weren't working against another intelligence service per se. We were really working against non-state actors, less sophisticated folks. And we had to find ourselves getting back into and realizing that, again, we were behind when we started looking at who is coming in to work on our classified projects at some of our research facilities, who is working on our sensitive DoD research that is happening at the university level. I think that the challenge for us now is understanding who those individuals are, who's working that, who are we bringing in as our research assistants, our graduate students. Quite frankly, very scary when we started out in in 2019, 2020, looking at some of the companies that we were engaged with and where those individuals within the company and the company itself actually had ties back to. To me, it's a blending of personnel and industry company vetting with, of course, all the attention that has been very rightfully put on supply chains, that sector where we also see it. But to me, open source gives us the ability to really do some very quick, very broad checks on individuals. Because quite frankly, when someone showed up at a gate, I had a law enforcement database and I had a secret and higher system. And of course, 9 times out of 10, there was no derogatory information in those databases for me to run a check. But a good open source intelligence person can say, gee, take a look at all the pictures on this individual's social media. Gee, take a look at all the places where this individual has stopped or been recorded or this name has occurred, or just layer upon layer of ways to look to see and find the things that previously, when we were just looking in classified holdings, we would never find, we would never see. And then I think just for depth, vetting the individuals who are coming into our organizations, who are part of that research, exposed to sensitive information. Do we now have the ability? And unfortunately, I think right now we're seeing it in the autopsy of cases after the fact, where we've had someone in a disclosure case, an elite case, and we go back and we go, oh my goodness, look at all these indicators. Look at all these places where we should have said security clearance should be suspended, access should be revoked, and had we known that earlier. And so to me, open sources are one of, if not the best tool to help us find that and find those individuals early and prevent problems instead of dealing and cleaning up in the aftermath.
I've got one more question that I'd like to ask you if I could, Terry. Now that you've stepped into the world of OSINT, if you could jump in a time machine and travel back and whisper one piece of advice to yourself as Commander of Air Force OSI, what would it be?
Enjoy where you are. Stop and smell the roses and not be constantly working, accelerating. And I would say this is true for Second Lieutenant Bullard, officer, and this is true for Terry Bullard, husband and dad. Don't be so fixated on the future. Don't be so inclined to, figure out, where's the next challenge coming from? Where's the next assignment? What's the next bit of trouble I can get myself into? Where can I find things? And not appreciating where you are in these moments in history that are truly incredible.
Terry, thank you so much for this thoughtful and generous conversation today. Listening to you really reminds me that in this age of rapid change, whether it's technology or geopolitics or intelligence itself, the fundamentals of great leadership, they just don't go out of style. Curiosity, resilience, and service, they all still matter. And Kylie and I are so grateful that we've had the chance to learn from your experience today, and even more grateful that leaders like you are helping shape the next generation. Thank you again for joining us on Open Secret.
Thank you guys for the opportunity to be here. It means so much to just be able to sit with 2 other professionals. I will tell you, it is just so wonderful to sit among folks who have tread the same ground, who've had the same challenges and are looking back at things in a similar way and to be able to bounce that off. So thank you for the time.
You've been listening to Open Secret, the power of open source intelligence. Open Secret was created by Kylie Pert, Amanda Shane, and Jane Van Tienen. A podcast by OSINT Combine. Make sure to visit our website, osintcombine.com, for information on how OSINT Combine can help you find, analyse, and act using open source information. Open Secret is recorded on the lands of the Cubby Cubby people. OSINT Combine acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians and traditional custodians of the land where we work, live, and learn.
A Tribute Pod production.